This episode is sponsored by my friends at Bloomerang. You already know your donors care. You see it in every gift and every note that comes back with a check. What you might not know is what they're telling us right now in the data. Bloomerang's 2026 Giving Signal Report surveyed more than 1,000 active donors. 91% say people need more help than ever, and 94% give more when they know exactly where their gift goes. The generosity's there. What's changed isn't the impulse to give, it's what donors need from you to say yes. The question is whether your organization is listening. Bloomerang's giving platform is built for purpose, to help you understand your donors, to help you act on the right signals, and most importantly, to help you raise more. Download the free 2026 Giving Signal Report at bloomerang.com. That's BLOOMERANG.com. And now on to the episode. Hello, and welcome to Nonprofit Nation. I'm your host, Julia Campbell, and I'm going to sit down with nonprofit industry experts, fundraisers, marketers, and everyone in between to get real and discuss what it takes to build that movement that you've been dreaming of. I created the Nonprofit Nation podcast to share practical wisdom and strategies to help you confidently find your voice, definitively grow your audience, and effectively build your movement. If you're a nonprofit newbie or an experienced professional who's looking to get more visibility, reach more people, and create even more impact, then you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello, this is Nonprofit Nation. Happy to have you here listening, wherever you're listening from. I'm your host, Julia Campbell, and we are going to discuss one of my absolute favorite topics today, social impact storytelling. And in this episode, I sit down with Nicholas Bruneau, a communications consultant who has worked with major international organizations, including the United Nations, the World Bank, and the European Union, as well as nonprofits, associations, media groups, and political organizations. And throughout his career, he's led digital advocacy campaigns focused on international development, education, sustainability, and climate change. And he's also the author of the book, Engage with Impact, 5 Steps to Transform Your Digital Communications for Social Impact. So Nicholas, welcome to the podcast. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So what first drew you to this work? It sounds like you've worked with a lot of organizations that have fairly complicated missions and where storytelling is probably absolutely important. But what first drew you to the work of communications?
As far as communications is concerned, I've always felt that a lot of organizations are not communicating closely with their audience. They're not being intimate enough. They're not being close enough. And that's creating that bridge. And that's where we're seeing actually nowadays a divide in trust. And so I've always seen that communications is a way to build that trust. Storytelling in particular, really helps if you're able to really tell a story that is going to break that usual mold, that is going to get people thinking and, regain that connection with people. So storytelling is really a way, and it's really been something that I've tried to learn and worked at with all of my clients to really help them to communicate better, to communicate, in a way that is more direct and more effective. So for example, I worked with one organization, and they were like totally only doing like reports, statistics, and scientific information. And that's when I saw that, they really needed some storytelling. So I worked with them, and then, that's the way I think that you're able to really connect with donors, with partners, your broader audience, and to really reach all your stakeholders.
Wonderful. I agree. I think that my sort of transition into storytelling was similar in that I found that nonprofits of all sizes, all stripes, all missions really struggle to communicate exactly why they do what they do. They can say what they do, but the why and drawing people in
Mm,
is so important. And you've worked with really large, well-known organizations, the UN, the World Bank, nonprofits, advocacy campaigns sort of across the world. What common storytelling challenges are you seeing that organizations are facing?
the first thing is, and I alluded to that when I talked about this other client, was they get stuck in this like
The
bubble
curse
where
of
they're talking
knowledge.
about technical stuff, acronyms, jargon. I worked with this UN agency, and they were using all these even some of the staff didn't know what the acronyms were were really meant. And so I think sometimes we assume that everybody knows what we're talking about. And I don't know if you read the book Made to Stick,
Yes.
right? Yeah, yeah, great.
I
And they
love it.
talk
I
about,
love Made to Stick. It's a very good book.
yeah, yeah, exactly. How stories can stick. They talk about this thing called the curse of knowledge.
Yes.
You think, that you have all this knowledge, you want to tell everything, and you want to say it in a very detailed and in a very technical way, but it doesn't always work that way. And so we'll be using like terms like transformative systems change or net zero.
Yeah. Right. And then no one knows what that means.
Yeah, exactly. Or at least like a very small portion of people really know. So you really need to, so storytelling can really, really help to get beyond that. Really, really help to explain, or at least help people to visualize what these big complex issues are. So for example, I worked with the Global Partnership for Education, and we talked about systems transformation. But what we wanted to do was to show what that really looks like on the ground. So, for example, we developed a story about a little girl in Nepal that, because of the fact that her family had economic issues and because of the cultural issues, she was staying at home and working, and she wasn't able to go to school. So we looked at ways in which we could help those families from impoverished areas to have the ability to send their daughters to school. And so this girl was a success story because it really showed that we were able to get beyond those system issues, which
Yes.
was the cultural, the economic issues, and to help them to really, really get to school and get the education that they deserved. So that is a kind of an example of how you can use storytelling in a way to explain something that is a little bit complex.
Have you read the book Start with Why by Simon Sinek?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's exactly what you're talking about here. I think the story of a young girl who has to work and through this grant program, she's the first in her family to go to school. That's the why. Like we focus so much
Mhm.
on the what we do and systems transformation, things like that, and not enough on the why of what we do. And that's what storytelling really does help convey. So I think that is an awesome
Mhm.
example. So what are the biggest misconceptions that you see in nonprofits around what makes a good story?
Mhm. Um, yeah, I mean, first of all, and we're going to talk about this later, but you know, good story doesn't have to be about a donor, so you don't need to be necessarily talking about, or it doesn't have to be talking about a recipient either, right? And also, I think we have this idea of a story as like the Star Wars film, like with the
Yes.
hero's journey, and it doesn't have to be like something that elaborate. It can be something really, really simple. But what it has to be is something where you're confronted with a challenge and you're showing progress. So and then the protagonist, of course there should be a protagonist, there should be someone that is focused, but it can be like a company, or it can be a country, for example. So I work with an organization, and we help them to give these country stories about how the country was confronting these societal issues and really working together with different government ministries and really solving problems. So that was a story in itself. It's not like the Star Wars story with
Yeah.
Darth Vader and stuff, but it still helps to inspire and helps to sort of clarify what countries or what people can actually do.
I think that's so important what you said. Sometimes a lot of the times when I talk about storytelling, I see fundraising directors, marketing directors, their faces just kind of go white because they think, oh, that means exploitation. That means I have to interview my clients on camera. That means I have to have a good, happy story about the great work that we do. But you just said, the hero of that story was the country and how they found a solution and how they work together. And it's about progress and not perfection. That's just so important. And I love that you brought that up. And
Mhm.
and I see this too. One of the biggest friction points that you mention is simply finding the right stories. So, where should nonprofits actually be looking for stories inside their organizations and communities?
Hmm. I think first it's creating that culture where you're helping people to find their stories across the organization. So I would organize, like for example, these workshops with people to talk about storytelling with program managers, field managers, or team leaders. So people that are not necessarily working in communications, for them to know what is a good story, what they should be looking for, and then to work with them so that they can then tell their own story. So what you're doing is you're giving them the tools to be able to tell their stories, because they're the ones that are on the ground. They're the ones that are closest to the issues and closest to the communities that you're serving. So it actually works in a win-win to a certain extent, because they become involved in the communications process, and at the same time you're building from the bottom up. You're getting these stories from the bottom up, instead of what some, I don't know, like I saw this RFP once with an agency, and they're like, we want 15 stories in 2 weeks. And I'm like, well, that's not going to be very organic.
No,
It's going to be a little bit like pulling
forced.
teeth. But in this case, if you're able to implement it in a way that is within your organization, that is internally established, and people understand, what is a good story, what is a narrative, or what are the messages that we're trying to convey, then at least they can align with that, and then they can propose some stories.
And that leads me to my next question. Are there sort of systems or habits that nonprofits can build, to consistently be looking for stories, to collect stories, instead of just scrambling, like you said, 15 stories in 2 weeks?
Yeah, yeah. So I do think that, like I was saying, that building that narrative first is going to be really important. So trying to sort of figure out, as an organization, what do we want to stand for? What are maybe the three themes that we want to really, really convey in all our communications? And then from those themes, how are we going to be able to tell stories that are going to be, let's say, speaking to different audiences? Mm-hmm. So if you have a partner audience or a donor audience, community audience, and then you then develop those stories, but you have to first get the narrative established.
Yes.
So that people are all going in the same direction, right? Mm-hmm. So I know there was, in one organization I worked for, unfortunately, one of the program teams started working on a story, and they, without telling us, independently, and then they did all this work, and then they got the pictures and compiled all these quotes and stuff, and then we looked at it and we said, well, this really is not the kind of message that we want. Yeah. It's not the right message. So it was really unfortunate. We still published it, but it was unfortunate because we hadn't conveyed that before. We hadn't conveyed that, and of course they didn't pull us in the loop beforehand as well, but which is another issue. But we hadn't conveyed, that these are the three pillars, for example, that we're looking for in our stories, for our blog posts, for our news items.
Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what I used to do when I started out as a development director. The campaign launches next week. Please send me a story. And without people understanding what that means, and without having that system or that culture already built around that overall narrative. And I love that you talk about helping staff to sort of recognize story signals. And like I call them story signals or mission moments, or those little anecdotes, those things that make the work meaningful. And that is the question that I think they need to be answering, not, oh, they think sometimes it has to be a story where a person's life has changed and everything is great, but sometimes it's just a little anecdote about the after school program and playing Uno, or it's something about, the executive director talking to a local funder and building a relationship that's going to really help the organization. Like, there's stories everywhere. Oh, so tell me about your storytelling course. Speaking of creating a storytelling system, I just wanted to quickly put a plug in for your course, and then I could plug my course too.
Great, it's great. Well, thanks. I think I really saw that need for people to tell stories, and it also helped me on my journey to then put all that information together into something that was digestible. So I'm putting together a course now, and I actually wanted to get initially some feedback about what are really different organizations doing. So I had a webinar just last month, which was looking at social impact storytelling with communications directors from various organizations. As I was saying just before we started recording, it was, we had over 350 people signed up, which really, really showed that there's a big interest. There's really, really a lot of importance placed on storytelling, because we had, 250 people that actually attended that day. So it really, really showed, and then a lot of feedback. So it really showed, I think, that people are eager to really learn about storytelling. Now, why is that? And I think that, not to say that it's only AI, but we are in a situation where authenticity and breaking through the noise is getting more and more challenging. So storytelling is really a vehicle for that. So the course is going to try to do that, and as well, I'm developing something that is going to try to meet all the key challenges. And one of them, as we'll talk about later, is stopping the scroll. So how can we really get people's attention quickly on these important issues?
Mm-hmm. Oh, and did you want to share the waitlist link?
Sure. It's if you can put it in the show notes, but it's going to be engagewithimpact.com/storytelling.
Okay.
So there, actually, I'm going to be launching in the autumn, so September, October. So, but in the meantime, if people want to get updates, the best way to sort of make sure that you're in the first cohort.
Oh, great. Yes. And I'm doing my Storytelling That Sticks course this summer. I haven't decided when it's going to launch yet. I only do it every couple of years. So for my podcast listeners, if you're on my email list or if you're listening to the podcast, you'll get more information about it when it launches. I just think that you can't learn too much about storytelling, and you can't practice and flex those muscles enough. It's sort of like a muscle that you have to build up.
Mm-hmm.
So, Nicholas, what questions should staff members have in mind and ask when they're interviewing someone whose story they might want to share out?
Mm-hmm. I think that, if you want to get the personal side, I think that it's really interesting that one of the people in the webinar, his name is Abdul Rahman Malik, and he works in a collective called the Caravanserai Collective, and they organize workshops to try to bridge the gap between people that are from either different religions or different groups in different communities, and they use storytelling to do that. And one of the strategies that they used approach by Marshall Gantz, which is a teacher that talks about, first, the formula is looking first at a story of self, then a story of us, and then a story of now. So what does that mean? Essentially, breaking it down is, the first question you ask is, let's say, so Abdul Rahman was talking about an event that they moderated about climate change. And he said, he said, we were at this big event, and then people were talking about, once again, like net zero and the ozone layer and all these big things. And then he was like, well, wait a sec. Why is this important for us? And he went specifically to some of the speakers. He was like, why is this important for you? On a personal level, why are you here? And then after that, the second question, so that's the story of self, where you try to sort of dig into, the personal side of things. And then the second is the story of us. So how does this relate with the bigger picture? Or how does this relate with our organization, for example? So you try to broaden it out, right? How does that personal point of view then relate with what you're doing on a professional level? And then after that, the story of now is, what are we doing? And what should we be doing to solve these issues? So you're breaking it down in a way that is going to go from the personal to the big picture issues and to then the action, something that is going to be inspirational. So then that is kind of a formula, which I really liked. I didn't know it before. And Abdul Rahman talked about this in a way that is going to be sort of really getting beyond, all these acronyms and all these terms and all these issues that are kind of impersonal, and trying to bring it back to, the intimate reasons as to why, for example, we're involved.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a fabulous framework. How can we balance emotional storytelling without making beneficiaries feel exploited or tokenized? So what are some ways we can kind of avoid that? That's a huge question that I get very, very often.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple of different strategies. The first is that, the person that you're interviewing they're not necessarily, they are a person themselves. And so we shouldn't refer to them as, for example, the farmer or the beneficiary or the refugee. We should talk about them as a person. What is their reality, and to bring the personality and the authenticity to the story, to the front of the story. And then I think what's important is then to show that they have agency, that they are deciding, and showing them what their decisions and their challenges have been and how they've dealt with it. And so us as an organization, we are helping them or giving them support, but they are the ones, and they should be the ones that are leading forward and moving the story forward. So that's, I think, really important. And then finally, of course, is, giving them the total autonomy to decide how they want to be portrayed, and letting them know that where and how many times they will be featured, so that they have complete clarity on where this is going to go. And so I think it's, trying to be as clear as possible, as transparent, but also giving the personal side of the story. And if it's really, really challenging, I know that now, of course, with AI, you can create these personas. And so I just saw actually just now that the European Commission, the Director General of Home Affairs, used Midjourney, and they used Railway AI to create a story about human trafficking. So really, really a way to sort of deal with personal or very sensitive issues without having an actual personal face, but using real stories perhaps, but not having a real person. Of course, it's always more beneficial if you can have a person to speak, but on these sensitive issues, I can clearly see that sometimes it's going to be too sensitive to have someone that has been involved in human trafficking to speak personally. But of course, in all these cases, you have to clearly label it as being AI developed or done in conjunction with AI.
Yes. Another person to follow in terms of ethical storytelling is Maria Bryan. So if you look her up on LinkedIn, she does storytelling circles, and she focuses a lot on trauma-informed storytelling and ethical storytelling. That's what she does. So she's where I've sent people usually for those conversations. But let's jump ahead. Let's start talking about storytelling formats that are performing well. I know you sent me the results of a poll that you created in your webinar, your storytelling webinar that just happened. You asked participants their biggest storytelling challenge, and the overwhelming answer was the difficulty of stopping the scroll. So how do we create scroll stopping storytelling content?
I think that, that's sort of one of the big things that we're confronted with, because if you spend a lot of time creating a story and nobody reads it, was it really worth your time? So perhaps internally you were able to build that momentum. I think we all want to get more views. We all want to get the right people to see our story. And unfortunately, the algorithms today are not helping us. So how do you do that? I think that, using, I think, a series of different tactics. So of course, video has just been showed. I was just watching the Reuters media, and video has skyrocketed as far as the use of video, not just for news, but in general. So trying to get that human first video, it can be a talking head, but of course you still need to be creative. So there's a framework for this as well, like in many
framework. I
it's
need to get a shirt that says "I love a framework" because it's easy to remember.
That's maybe a good idea. Maybe we can do an acronym for that framework. What do you think?
Wait, are you talking about which framework are you talking about?
For the t-shirt, yeah.
Oh, right. Well, I know I need a shirt that says, "Yes, you'll get the slides" for when I present. Yes, you'll get the slides. And that was an acronym that was on labels at a conference that I just went to. It was like YYGTS. Yes, you'll get the slides. So yeah, we could create acronyms around anything.
Yeah. We should get an acronym as well on don't paste the picture in the Word document. That is another pet peeve, I think. So if we can find a good acronym for that one that is memorable.
Yeah, and we'll just create that I laugh though, because it's I love a framework, because I laugh.
Yes.
So it's a good one. Easy to remember.
Cool. So going back to this framework though, is the HIDE framework. So I think it stands for hook, intrigue, delivery, and engagement, or call to action at the end. So first you start with the hook, and then you create some intrigue. So you showcase basically the challenge, and then delivery, you showcase what you've done to overcome that challenge, and then finally engagement, which is basically the call to action to basically either find out more or do something specific. So that's a very short form video kind of action point. It aligns really well with the short story and also the storytelling form that I use as well, which is simply challenge, solution, and impact, right? So what's the challenge? What's the solution? And what's the impact? So that's the most simple storytelling framework that you can have. But going back to like stopping the scroll, I was just at an event yesterday on storytelling, and one of the researchers talked about the fact that good stories, or the ones that we remember, are the ones that either shock us or the ones that surprise us. So I think that if we can create content that is going to surprise people, that is going to get them outside of their comfort zone. He also talked about, unfortunately, the fact that negative news is what gets a lot of coverage and what people remember. And so when there's a negative story, that's what people remember, not the positive stories. So what do we do if we want to tell positive stories, which is what I asked him. So he said, exactly, try to sort of do something that is going to be surprising, that is going to maybe do some behind the scenes content, or, work with your employees to do content with them. So for example, there's one communications director I was talking with, and they did a story, and he was really worried that they weren't going to get much traction out of the story. So he asked the author of the story to do a post about the story and why the story was important for her. So to give that personal point of view.
That's important.
It was a little bit, it's funny because it was essentially a story about a story, but it really helped because people first had that personal point of view. And then after that, we're able to see, maybe I should read that story. And in the webinar, Ray Stuo who's the communications director for the the Global Alliance for Nutrition, she said that what they are doing for their reports, for example, is they're doing almost like unboxing videos. They're unboxing a report, and they're getting the author of the report to talk about why this report is important for him or her. So really bringing it down to a personal point of view once again, even though it is a report. So piquing people's interest. So I think that is what you want at the end if you really want to stop the scroll.
If a nonprofit listening today wants to improve its storytelling in the next 30 days, what's the first step you'd recommend?
So the first step I think would be that I think in all your content, you should be really, really asking, why is this important? And then is this really helping us and helping towards our narrative? So if you're doing that constantly, then you're really helping the organization to keep its ears open for stories, and you're able to tailor and focus your energies on telling the right stories. So I think that we're all with limited time and limited resources. So we need to be focused. And so the more focused we are on having that narrative, first of all, as I mentioned, and then working internally to find those stories, then the better it will be, and the fewer resources we'll have to spend.
And I agree. And I love the HIDE framework, because I try to teach, when I teach social media, the hook. What's going to get people to stop the scroll? It's not, hi, I'm Julia Campbell. I'm the executive director of XY. If you start a video with that, I'm going to swipe right past it. But if you ask a question, what's going on with SNAP benefits? Like, I think of No Kid Hungry, the work they do on Instagram. They're always asking questions. What's going on with WIC benefits? What's going on with federal funding cuts to food banks? What would you do if you had to choose between rent and food? And that's the hook to watch the video. And then there's sort of that insight that they give, or the intrigue of why are you continuing to watch the video? And you can do all this in 30 seconds. You really can. So I love that you teach that framework, but also just trying to get nonprofits out of their comfort zone, out of the status quo of how we've always done things and how we thought we always needed. We still think of our content like a press release.
Yeah.
All the content, a lot of the content, when I do my audits, I read the content. I think we all are writing press releases and posting press releases 90% of the time. And that's not going to do it. It's not going to move the needle at all. So,
yeah. And it's also, it's also understanding that audience. So what is your audience going to be interested
absolutely
in seeing or hearing about, right? So not just talking about yourself, but then finding ways in which you can suss that out. So of course, the ideal thing is going to be doing a survey of your audience, understanding what are the issues that they're interested in hearing more about, their pain points, for example, and then doing content around that. Of course, some people will not have those resources. So sometimes you can do just a social media poll, but I think that really helps to try to understand what is that hook that is going to get them to watch your video.
What gives you hope right now?
I think that, like I said, there's real interest in people to tell stories. And so, we're all storytellers, but some of us, we're just stuck in this loop where we just do the same thing over and over again. And so I'm seeing a lot of interest, and I'm seeing a lot of people that are interested in telling better stories. And there's a reason why last year, for example, storytelling was, I think, one of the most used words in job descriptions for communications. Wow. So I think there was a LinkedIn poll that showed that storytelling jobs skyrocketed like 2 or 3 times compared to previous years. So and there's a lot of issues. The fact that there's fewer journalists. So the journalists aren't telling the stories. So if you're a brand, how are you going to tell your story? How are you going to get, people to actually understand the ethos of your organization? It's not the journalists anymore because they don't have time to do it.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to tell your story, and you need to put that front and center. And then, of course, once again, algorithms and then AI makes it much more difficult. So we need to really, really tell those stories. So they are there, but it's creating that culture. And so there's a real interest to do that.
Well, Nicholas, this has been fantastic. Where can my listeners connect with you, learn more about you, and where they can sort of find your course and other resources you offer?
Mm-hmm. So if anyone is interested in the course or learning a little bit more and being in the first cohort, engagewithimpact.com/storytelling has the waitlist there. And then, of course, on LinkedIn, I'd be happy to connect with people there as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And at the time of this recording, the World Cup is going on. So when it comes out, we will have determined who won. But I'm, of course, rooting for Scotland because I'm a Campbell. But you're rooting for Portugal?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Well, may the best team win. So
thank you very much.
Have fun. And yeah, this was so fantastic. So connect with Nicholas, look at the show notes, and get signed up for that first cohort. Thanks again for being on the show.
Cool. And thank you. And I look forward to as well seeing your storytelling course. So, and then after that, we can compare notes.
Compare notes. Awesome. Yeah. All right. Thanks, Nicholas.
Thank you.
Well, hey there. I wanted to say thank you for tuning into my show and for listening all the way to the end. If you really enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app, and you'll get new episodes downloaded as soon as they come out. I would love if you left me a rating or a review, because this tells other people that my podcast is worth listening to. And then me and my guests can reach even more earbuds and create even more impact. So that's pretty much it. I'll be back soon with a brand new episode. But until then, you can find me on Instagram at JuliaCampbell77. Keep changing the world, you nonprofit unicorn.